Evan Davis.
Back in November, when the court said Parliament should get a vote on Brexit, there was rejoicing on one side, dismay on the other.
Parliament has to decide. Absolutely not. We have a parliamentary democracy.
Today, the Supreme Court upheld that verdict, but it wasn't really clear who'd won or lost.
This judgment does not change the fact that the UK will be leaving the European Union, and it's our job to deliver on the instruction the people of the UK have given us.
Never has so much attention been given to a Supreme Court case of such enormous constitutional significance, but which may end up having no substantive effect. We'll hear from Salmond on the path Scotland will now take, and Labour's Emily Thornberry on the party's challenge of trying to appeal to both sides of the Brexit debate. Also tonight, should primary school children wear hijabs?
We mustn't normalise it. Instead of supporting that practice, I think we should actually question it, because actually what you are doing is you are sexualising that child.
And Donald Trump invites the cameras into the Oval Office. What's he got to say about the environment?
We can't be in an environmental process for 15 years if a bridge is going to be falling down or if a highway is crumbling. So we're expediting environmental reviews and approvals. That's what this is.
Hello. If you thought the arguments over Brexit would end after the referendum, sorry, it's not over, and the Supreme Court has invited the arguments to continue in the Commons and perhaps more crucially now in the House of Lords. Then there's Scotland. The court didn't give the government there any power over Brexit, but the SNP are not going to accept Theresa May's version of it quietly. Now, it's not clear who will actually have the muscle to block or delay Brexit, and the bookies still think Article 50 will probably be triggered before the end of March. But there is a chance it'll get messy. Our policy editor, Chris Cook, is good at making sense of a mess. Here's how he thinks things might pan out.
All rise.
It's official. To invoke Article 50, Downing Street won't need to consult the devolved governments, but will need to pass a bill through Parliament.
In broad terms, Article 50 provides that a country wishing to leave the EU must give a notice in accordance with its own constitutional requirements.
Right now, that doesn't look like a serious problem for ministers. The first stage then in the Article 50 process is taking a bill into the House of Commons. Now, the fundamental fact about the lower house of Parliament is there's a Conservative majority. They've got the votes. So yes, the SNP and the Liberal Democrats might cause trouble for the government, but fundamentally they won't succeed. The only changes that people are really looking for or hoping for from the lower house are really quite narrowly procedural.
Mr. Speaker.
Here, for example, is Labour's position.
Labour accepts and respects the referendum result and will not frustrate the process. But we will be seeking to lay amendments to ensure proper scrutiny and accountability throughout the process. That starts, Mr. Speaker, with a white paper or plan.
The government hopes that the bill will be through the Commons by February the 9th, when it rises for its next recess. Then it's off to the House of Lords, which is where it's likely to have a tougher time. Remember, the government doesn't have a majority in the upper house. But any problems there are likely to take the form of unhelpful amendments and perhaps a bit of delay, not outright blocking.
On big items, the House of Lords is often restrained by the fact that there was a commitment in a manifesto, and by convention the House of Lords doesn't oppose manifesto commitments. But this time, while there was a commitment to a referendum, there certainly wasn't a commitment to take the UK out of the single market. So some members at least will see that as giving them licence to challenge the government. But ultimately the House of Lords probably won't want to be seen to be frustrating the will of the British people as expressed in the referendum result last year.
Now, the government says that Parliament will get another opportunity to vote on the deal that it gets from Europe at the end of the process. But whether that's an opportunity for Parliament to really scrutinise what's going on and suggest changes depends on precisely when the government comes back for that vote.
The draft deal has to come back before it's been signed, because Parliament can look at it and either say that's fine or it's mostly fine but this isn't, can you go back and see if you can get something different or better on this. It's important that it comes at that stage rather than Parliament being asked take it or leave it at the 11th hour. I don't think that would be acceptable.
Given our rulers haven't much been constrained, perhaps the biggest question today is why they took this case to the Supreme Court at all.
Chris Cook. Well, the Scottish Government does not have and has not sought a veto over Brexit. Thanks to the Supreme Court, we now know there's no requirement for a vote in the devolved parliaments or assemblies, but the Scottish Parliament is going to have a vote anyway. Well, earlier I spoke to Alex Salmond, former First Minister, SNP Foreign Affairs spokesman. Now, today he has said Downing Street must treat the devolved administrations as equal partners in the Brexit process, quote, as she promised to do. Well, I asked where Theresa May did make such a promise.
What they said, what she and the Tory party have said, is that Scotland is an equal partner within the United Kingdom. Actually, the phrase, not from Theresa May, but from her predecessor, was Scotland should lead the United Kingdom, not leave the United Kingdom. But the phrase equal partnership has been used by the Conservative Party, that Scotland is an equal partner within the United Kingdom. If you're an equal partner within the United Kingdom, then your views on something as substantial and far-reaching as Brexit deserve to be taken on account on an equal basis.
Well,
what Theresa May said,
of course, it was one person, one vote in Scotland, as it was everywhere else in the country. A Scottish person was equal to everywhere else.
But Scotland is a country, not a county. And the Scottish nation voted decisively to stay within the European Union. But of course it was Theresa May who said explicitly the week after she became Prime Minister, when she went to visit Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland, she said she wanted an agreed position across the United Kingdom. Now, you can't have an agreed position unless you're prepared to consult people on an equal basis.
Well, she's consulting, but I don't think it was ever understood that the Scottish administration would have equal say in an issue of customs union, immigration policy, foreign policy, international treaties, as the government of the United Kingdom, in which the people of Scotland have a large shaping part, because they vote in UK general elections, obviously.
The vote in favour of staying in the European Union was 62%.
Right.
The vote in favour of the United Kingdom was 55%. Far more people in Scotland, by majority and percentage, wanted to stay within Europe as wanted to stay within the United Kingdom. And as you'll remember, in 2014, one of the cardinal arguments of the No campaign, though people argue against independence, was that we'd stay in Europe if we voted against Scottish independence. Now, I know it's ridiculous now, it looks absurd, but that was one of the key arguments of the No campaign. And more to the point, of course, Nicola Sturgeon, the Scottish First Minister, stood on a manifesto commitment last year and was re-elected on the basis that if Scotland was dragged out of Europe against the will of the Scottish people, then the Scottish Parliament would have the right to call an independence referendum.
Well, that brings me, I suppose, to what is the big question for the SNP today. It's got to be the big question for the SNP. Why don't you just call a referendum? You're not going to learn anything between now and Brexit. We know what the British government's policy on Brexit is. It's been stated by Theresa May as clearly as anything. We know that Scotland is not going to remain in the single market, as the Scottish government hopes. We know that Britain is not even going to try and stay in the single market. What else do you need to trigger a referendum?
Well, let's go through the parliamentary process as far as the single market is concerned. The UK government is still to respond officially to the Scottish Government's compromise proposal that if England is determined to leave the single market, then Scotland could stay in the single market. There's working examples elsewhere in Europe where this is the case. Why shouldn't that be considered as a reasonable proposal? But if at the end of the day, Theresa May is not interested in staying in the single market, she's not interested in respecting the wishes of the people of Scotland to stay within the single market, maintain jobs and investment, then of course, if she flings down that gauntlet, then I fully expect Nicola Sturgeon to pick it up.
Well, then we do expect a referendum, because she's not going to give you different status within the single market. There are all sorts of practical challenges and difficulties around free movement of that. Well, but the difficulty is that we won't have...
Let me just examine that point. That is not true. There actually is a working example in Europe at the present moment of a country which has a monetary and a customs union with another country, and one is within the single market and one isn't. That's Liechtenstein and Switzerland. If you intend to implement control of labour at the workplace through a green card system, as Theresa May does, there is no impediment whatsoever to Scotland being within the single market while England is not. It is a practical proposition. It is, of course, has complexities, but anything about Brexit has complexities. And this is a practical proposition. So you dismiss this. Why shouldn't the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom pay attention to the wishes of the Scottish people, the Scottish Parliament and the Scottish Government?
I'm, I suppose, curious as to why you're offering this rather complicated, and it would be complicated, this rather complicated settlement when there's a much simpler one facing you, which is to call a referendum and just let the Scottish people decide. Is it the UK? Is it the EU? What is it that the Scottish people want? Why are you? Is it because the polls are against you that you're not going to do it?
Right. Okay. Well, let's take these points in turn. It's nothing like as complicated as the Brexit process. Believe me, that will be complicated. There's already going to be, we know, special deals for Northern Ireland, for the Channel Islands, for Gibraltar, perhaps even for the City of London, for the car industry in Sunderland. And if there can be a special deal for the car industry in Sunderland, then I think there might be a special deal for the nation of Scotland. But if the Prime Minister at the end of the day doesn't want to accede to any of these reasonable compromise proposals from Nicola Sturgeon, then, as Nicola Sturgeon has rightly said, an independence referendum becomes very likely and will take place within the next 2 years. And as for the support for it, there's been 16 polls since the Brexit vote in the United Kingdom. 15 of these polls have shown support at a higher level than the 45% recorded in September 2014.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a poll that 62% of Scottish people don't want another independent referendum.
Yes, I saw that poll as well. The question was, wanted a referendum in 2017. I would vote against the referendum this year, as indeed would Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon's proposition in these circumstances, with her compromise proposal rejected, is to have a referendum within the negotiating period of 2 years.
Would you accept that if there's another referendum, that really is it? That's best of three. You can't even win on a best of three at that stage. So if it's 2-0, it's over. And this time, really, it is over for 30, 50 years. It can't come back again for decades.
Well, let me say this. If the Prime Minister decides to ignore the, I think, over substantial demand in the UK as a whole to stay within the single marketplace, if she then decides to ignore the wishes of Scotland to maintain our 1,000-year connection and history with Europe as a European nation, in that context, if there's a referendum within the next 2 years, then the yes side will win.
Alex Salmond, nice talking to you. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Alex Salmond there. Well, for some reason, it is perhaps Labour that is struggling with the consequences of this Supreme Court verdict as much as the government. If Parliament is to vote, then Labour has to make up its mind as to exactly what its position is. And yet it has given a good impression of being in a muddle. Keen to support Brexit, as that was the result of the referendum, but also having lots of Remain supporters it can't ignore. It's kind of stuck between UKIP in some blue-collar neighbourhoods and the Lib Dems in university towns. Well, Nick Watt's been looking at where the party stands.
For the best part of 3 decades, Europe has cast a shadow over the Conservative Party. Now, at the very moment many Tories have been expecting a split of historic proportions, it is the Labour Party which is wrestling with this most troublesome of issues. The vast bulk of the Conservative Party accepts Theresa May's timetable for triggering Article 50 and her overall Brexit blueprint. As for the Labour Party, they are struggling to fashion a coherent response. Many Labour MPs are also trying to work out how to adapt their instinctively pro-EU views whilst representing constituencies which recorded high Leave votes in the referendum.
I campaigned passionately for Remain. I lived and worked in Brussels for a number of years. I'm married to a Dane and all the rest of it. So I'm pro-European with my heart and my head. But I'm also a Democrat. The referendum has overridden the way that I would normally look at the European question. And now we have to accept the reality of where we are and push the government to secure the best possible deal for the British people.
It was but half a generation ago that Labour's fervent support for the EU was an electoral asset. Now the referendum has changed everything, presenting Labour with a daunting challenge.
Labour's never going to appeal to people who are fervently pro-European and die-hard Brexiteers. It's got to try and change the terms of the political conversation, reach out to people who didn't feel hugely strongly in either direction. And that really means not talking about Brexit anymore. While the conversation is about Brexit, Labour's in a strategically weak position.
Andrew Harrop believes a weakened Labour Party is providing rich pickings for other parties. Since the 2015 general election, it's estimated that Labour has lost the highest number of votes to the Lib Dems, 400,000. However, it's also lost 200,000 votes to the Conservatives and 200,000 to UKIP.
The Labour Party in complete disarray. They don't know what they think. You talk to a dozen different Labour MPs on the issue, you get a dozen different answers. Labour Party should be getting behind voting to trigger Article 50, but I've been speaking to some even today who say they're still going to try and frustrate the process.
One unlikely voice sympathises with Labour.
I'm relatively sympathetic to Jeremy Corbyn in the position he finds himself, because I think he is finding problems that any Labour leader would find, and they are not specific to him. He is a symptom, not a cause, of the division, with the London voters thinking one thing and broadly the northern voters thinking another.
Jacob Rees-Mogg believes his party has an opportunity unprecedented in the modern era.
The Conservative Party is probably more united on Europe than it has been since the days of Anthony Eden. And Mrs May is in the fortunate position of having less opposition than almost any Conservative leader, probably in history, that she has a united party. There's no internal opposition.
Stephen Kinnock believes all may not be lost for his party.
The government has a mandate to take the UK out of the European Union. They do not, in my view, have a mandate to turn us into some sort of European version of the Cayman Islands. Brexit is not an excuse for making a bonfire of workers' rights, a bonfire of environmental rights, of slashing the minimum wage, slashing corporation tax, deconstructing the welfare state that this country is built on. This government does not have a mandate to do that, so our job is to draw those battle lines.
In the space of a few years, the UK has experienced 2 landmark referendums, and it has been Labour which has faced acute challenges in their aftermath. The party will be hoping that the shadow cast by Brexit will lift, although ironically it may take a definitive break with the EU to allow Labour to return to more natural terrain.
Nick Watt, well, I'm joined by the Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry. Thank you very much for coming in. Look, I know what the Lib Dems think about the EU. UKIP writes itself, and I know where Theresa May stands. I would find it hard to say where Labour stands at the moment. Just in a couple of sentences, what's your policy?
Firstly, do you really know where the Lib Dems stand? They've only got a group of 9, and the last time they had to vote on Article 50, half of them voted one way and the other half abstained.
They want to stay in and they want a second referendum.
Well, that's
you
what
don't
some
want
of them
that.
have said
But they
today.
are very keen to stay in. Now,
anyway.
what's in 2 sentences? What is Labour's position on what happens now? Not on the process, but on what we want, where we want to be.
Our position is this, that the British people have spoken, we have our instructions, we have to make sure that we get the best possible deal. We believe the best possible deal begins with the economy. Nobody voted, whether they voted to remain or to leave, to be poorer or to lose their job.
And that, on that point, you are no different to Theresa May, because she believes we want as much market access as we can get, we want investment. Now, she is not willing to pay the price for that market access by giving up control of our borders. Are you saying you would have less control of the borders than Theresa May is advocating?
I think there are definitely differences in terms of emphasis, but I think that the speech that she made was she was trying to ride 2 horses at once that were going in 2 different directions. And it is our job as the opposition, and remember, we are only the opposition, we have to hold her to account, there are bits in her speech we like. So we like the idea of a tariff-free access to the single market. We like there not being a build-up of red tape. That's the sort of thing we like to hear. So, yes, we will support her on that, and we want to make sure that the negotiations go that way. But when she talks about some kind of weird new customs union entirely built for Britain, or when she says, if we don't get this deal, then we're going to become a completely different country, we're going to break the economic model. This is what she said.
Yeah.
She said she wanted to break the economic model. She said she wanted to attract businesses.
She didn't want to, that was the backup plan.
No, all right, okay. She threatened something. She can only threaten it if she means it. And what she means is if she doesn't get her own way, she's going to try and attract businesses here by lowering corporation tax and by making it more attractive. That means less money for services.
Understand.
You know,
so that critique I've heard. I suppose I really want to know.
You don't know what we say.
No, but I know what your critique of her is. What I want to know is basically the question is there an alternative vision to Brexit, to the one that says we get control of our border back, we leave the single market, we leave the customs union, and we just fight for as much access as we can get after that? Now, that sounds to me as that's what your position is. You're not saying we'll have free movement, so we are going to leave the free market, the single market.
No. What we're saying is that our first principle, what is most important, is that we look after the economy. What's most important for any government is the safety and security of its citizens, and the second is the economy.
So you would have free movement, because all the economists will tell you is free movement is the price you pay to get the best market access, and the best market access is good for the economy. So
if we're not going to be in the single market, and we're going to have a custom-made deal for Britain, then there will need to be negotiating, and we've made it clear that we will not die in a ditch for freedom of movement. There needs to be some give and take on this, but our priority is to make sure that nobody loses their job and that we look after the economy. Because because people who are just keeping their head above water will be the ones who will be affected most if the economy goes backwards. This is entirely consistent with Labour values.
I understand, but I'm not entirely clear as to the trade-off between market access, let's call that good for the economy, and control of borders, which allows us to control immigration. I'm not 100% clear where you are on that. Look, let's suppose you've knocked on my door. I'm a member of the public. You've knocked on the door, and I say, "Here, Emily Thornberry, tell me what your policy on Europe is. Now, give it to me in a punter-friendly style."
Well, I've just told you. Do you want me to say it all over again?
Right. So it's priority to the economy. What about immigration? What's the policy on immigration?
Our policy on immigration is that we will not die in a ditch for freedom of movement.
That's not a policy. We won't die in a ditch. Are you for us or against it?
It will be a negotiation.
You're for free movement or you're against free movement? You're not dying in a ditch implies you want it, but you're not going to...
We're not against immigration. We have always been in favour of fair rules and managed migration. That has always been Labour's policy, and it continues to be Labour's policy.
So you're in favour of free movement, but you're not going to die in a ditch for it. But the EU wants us to have free movement, so not dying in a ditch for it, it's going to be easy to negotiate. You will keep it and get good market access.
Now, do you know what? We're not going to be doing the negotiations. Unfortunately, we're in opposition. And so our job is to make sure that this government does not lose sight of the overwhelming importance of jobs and living standards and the economy. We do not need them to... We do not trust them to go off on their own and negotiate on our behalf in Europe without us keeping an eye on them. And that's why today what we were saying was that, that the Article 50, if it's going to be triggered, we will not get in the way of it, but we will try and amend the legislation in order to ensure that they keep coming back, that we keep an eye on it. And if necessary, there'll be hand-to-hand combat on this. We need to make sure that we get the best deal on behalf of the whole country. And she can't say she acts on behalf of the whole country without actually negotiating with Parliament, without listening to Parliament, without listening to the views of the British people. We represent important parts of Britain. Actually, people say, oh, Labour's in such difficulties. We've got, people who are in favour of leaving the European and people who want to leave the Union. Actually, we represent the country. I mean, the fact is that we have a...
And they represent more of it because they've got more votes.
Yeah, but the mixture of views within the Labour Party reflects the views in the... And so actually, the way in which we're thinking about this with a little more depth, I think, than the Tories are, is a good thing. And we can contrip and we can help, but they do need to listen.
Very positive spin on the division.
But it's not a spin, it's simply the truth.
Right. One of the things you've been... the lines today has been you will not let the government turn Britain into an offshore Cayman Islands.
Damn right we won't.
Is that going to be an amendment to the Article 50 bill? That Is there going to be something to that effect?
Let's see what the bill is first.
Right.
It's really difficult
It's going to be a couple of lines, probably, isn't it? It's going to be on
maybe
Thursday.
and maybe not. Let's see
because
what
there's no point now, is there? You could put an amendment saying Britain mustn't become a tax haven, or Britain mustn't aim to reduce
Well, we may not be allowed to put it in exactly those words.
But there's no point anyway, because a future government can just change its mind on that. It's not a negotiating thing with the EU.
But there'll be a number of things, right?
Okay.
So the first thing is the plan. It may be a piece of paper with plan written on the top, but it's a speech that she didn't make in Parliament and she wasn't answerable to questions. Right. And so we want to have a white paper, first thing. We want to have a clear plan so that we can look at exactly what it is, so that we can hold them to account. If that's what she says she wants to do, she's promising everything to everyone. Let's have it written down and let's hold her to it. Let's scrutinise. That's number one. Number two is, what are the broad principles? What are the broad principles when you're negotiating? We want to be able to set some lines in the sand. This you should be doing, this you... And then, most importantly, is the accountability. So as you go along, you must keep reporting back. We should hold you to account. And that final vote should not be at the 11th hour when it's basically take it or leave it.
All process stuff. All process. But that's, I mean, that's interesting. But if there's not really much difference between you and them...
There is a difference. There is a lot of difference between our approach and the Tories' approach. I really think.
Do you accept... I mean, one of the difficulties for Labour is that basically the country's great schism is Remain a Brexit. And opposition that is trying to be kind of, well, we accept the Brexit result. It puts you in a very difficult position because, in a sense, you're not on the great fissure, on either side of the great fissure in politics.
No, in the end, you know, you cannot have political parties who go for one half or the other half, which is what the other two parties are doing. Actually, the fact that we are trying to bring the country together under the principle that we need to look after the economy and we need to get the best deal on behalf of the whole country is something that we can unify the country around. We're not going to chase 48%. We're not going to chase an extreme part of 52%. We're going to do our utmost to ensure that we stand up for the whole country and we should be listened to, and we're going to make sure that we are.
Emily Thornberry, thanks very much.
Thanks.